All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive, sudden environmental policy shift coming right out of Havering Council. You can find the full in-depth breakdown of this over at londoner.news/havering-council-climate emergency-declaration. Now, if you follow local government and environmental policy, you already know that declaring a climate emergency has been a pretty standard move for municipalities all over the world lately. But what actually happens when a council decides to walk that declaration completely back? Well, today we're looking straight at the source documents and official statements to figure out the how and the why behind Havering's major policy pivot.
So let's start with a really provocative question. What happens when a local council just reverses its climate emergency? It's a fascinating situation to dig into because it perfectly highlights this massive real-world tug-of-war going on right now between local government budget constraints and huge global environmental targets. And this isn't just about one single borough, it's honestly a micro-study of a debate happening globally as we speak. How do you balance the immediate everyday needs of local residents with long-term ecological goals?
Here is the big breaking news. On Wednesday, July 22nd, 2026, Havering Council's new administration officially voted to completely scrap their previously held climate emergency declaration. And this wasn't just some quiet, under-the-radar phase-out. No, they passed a formal motion at a full council meeting to definitively wipe out the emergency status. But to really understand the gravity of a decision like that, we first need to understand exactly what they were reversing.
To do that, we've got to flashback to the original 2023 policy. It was known as the Caring for Our Local Environment Action Plan, or if you love a good local government acronym, CFOLEAP. This document set the initial, highly ambitious baseline for the borough right after they first declared an emergency in March 2023. It was built to be this totally comprehensive strategy, aiming for a cleaner, greener future through massive collective action across the entire community.
And the absolute cornerstone metric of that entire 2023 action plan? One single year, 2040. The council made a rock-solid, documented commitment for the entire borough to become completely carbon neutral by that exact date. That was the guiding star for literally all of their policy decisions over the last couple of years. Every single project, every procurement choice, and every line in the budget was supposed to be evaluated on whether it helped hit that huge 2040 net zero target. Now, to hit a goal that massive, the previous administration rolled out 9 completely comprehensive work streams. And they weren't just going after the obvious stuff either. We're talking a total systemic overhaul. They categorized efforts across everything from the built environment to internal business continuity, and even started auditing the carbon footprint of their entire corporate procurement supply chain. The goal was to embed climate action into literally every single facet of how the council operated. The historical data they were looking at actually tells a pretty interesting story, too. There had been a general downward trend in total emissions across the borough since 2018. But here's the catch. Despite those gradual declines, the numbers showed some seriously steep hurdles ahead if they were ever going to reach absolute zero by 2040. The easy wins, those were already behind them. The hard, incredibly expensive, systemic changes were what lay ahead. Breaking down those numbers shows exactly what they were up against. The transport and domestic sectors were just absolutely dominating the local greenhouse gas output. Transport alone hit a staggering 430 kilotons. To put that in perspective, that's roughly equivalent to driving an average car 1 billion miles. 1 billion. Meaningfully reducing those numbers means fundamentally changing how thousands of everyday people heat their private homes and commute to work on a daily basis. Those are 2 areas that are fiercely expensive and incredibly complex for a local council to try and influence. And well, that brings us right to the 2026 pivot. Looking down the barrel of the sheer scale and the massive cost required to hit that 2040 target, the new leadership decided to completely change course. They shifted the entire philosophy away from broad climate targets and pivoted strictly toward immediate practical outcomes and affordability. They made the argument that when municipal budgets are this tight, the council's absolute primary responsibility has to be delivering high-quality, essential public services that offer clear, immediate value for money for the taxpayer today. So we are really looking at a fundamental philosophical shift in how local government operates. On one hand, you have the 2023 framework, highly systemic, heavily tied to global climate treaties and anchored by that strict 2040 deadline. And then on the other hand, the 2026 approach, hyperlocal, highly pragmatic, officially replacing net zero with immediate local priorities and direct taxpayer value. It is just a total redefinition of where a local council's responsibilities begin and end.
to really understand their stance neutrally, let's look at what Council leader Keith Prince actually said. He argued that net zero policies were putting unnecessary financial strain on essential services. His exact words were, "We don't need a climate emergency in place that will force the council to try and meet arbitrary targets that cost the taxpayer money." From their viewpoint, chasing these expensive, long-term global targets was quite literally coming at the expense of maintaining the clean, safe parks and streets that residents are paying for right now.
Now, the new administration firmly maintains that dropping this emergency declaration doesn't mean they're just walking away from environmental work. Actually, for them, it's about cutting the cord between local green initiatives and what they see as strictly symbolic, incredibly costly global milestones. This is absolutely crucial to grasp. They are making the case that environmental improvements should be driven by measurable benefits that directly impact the community's quality of life today, rather than being restricted by a top-down emergency framework. The major takeaway here is that future environmental spending in Havering is now going to be strictly judged on those measurable, highly localized benefits instead of global carbon metrics. They are focusing on totally tangible things: cleaner streets, better maintained parks and green spaces, boosting local biodiversity, improving waste services, and strengthening flood resilience. These are everyday improvements that residents can actually see and experience directly on their morning walk, rather than abstract carbon accounting on a spreadsheet.
And even with the official climate emergency title gone, the absolute need for everyday, grassroots community engagement in protecting local green spaces hasn't vanished. In fact, if you look back at the original action plans, a lot of those community-driven initiatives, like working with local schools and promoting neighborhood biodiversity, well, they actually align perfectly with this new localized focus. The ultimate goal of caring for the environment remains, but the lens has officially shifted from managing a global crisis to cultivating civic pride.
Which all leaves us with a really fascinating question to ponder. Is a hyper-local, totally practical focus the most responsible way to use taxpayer funds? Or is literally every level of government morally obligated to chip in on the massive global push for net zero? It is a hugely complex debate that forces us to look closely at the very role of local government itself. To read the full context on this specific policy shift, you absolutely need to head over to londoner.news/Havering Council Climate Emergency Declaration and check out their full breakdown. And definitely be sure to visit londoner.news for live updates on this story as it develops. Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and keep learning.